ICQ Podcast episode 275, Loudspeakers for Ham Radio. Well, hello fellow amateur radio enthusiasts and welcome to this, our 275th episode of the ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, supported by John Peterson and our monthly and annual subscription donors. In this episode, Martin M1LRB is joined by Chris at Mike 0, Tango Charlie Hotel, Dan, Kilo Bravo 6, November Uniform, Martin, Mike 0, Sierra Golf Lima, and Frank, Kilo 6, Foxtrot Mike Hotel to discuss the latest amateur ham radio news. Myself, Colin M6BOY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is a feature on loudspeakers for ham radio. Well, as always, for your listening pleasure, we like to keep the podcast advert free, and we can only do that with your donations. So this episode, along with the monthly and annual subscription donors, we'd like to thank John Peterson for sending us a once-off 10th birthday donation, and we greatly appreciate, John, you supporting the show. You can help out by visiting www.icqpodcast.com/donate, where anything you send their way is always greatly appreciated. Well, now we join Martin, Chris, Dan, and Frank to discuss the latest amateur ham radio news, including new ARRL Chief Executive elected to the Board of Directors, and the Zello network has expanded into Ireland. Hope you enjoy.
Well, hi guys, and welcome to episode 257 of the ICQ podcast and tonight's news roundtable. I'm joined by Mr. Chris Howard M0TCH. Hi, Chris.
Evening, Martin. Evening, guys.
Yeah, hi guys. I've also got Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU. Hi, Dan.
Good evening. Well, good afternoon here.
Well, sometime in the world. Colin always says good morning, or in the morning, but he says it's morning somewhere. We also have Mr. Martin Rothwell M0SGL. Nearly got it wrong, mine.
Afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are and wherever you're listening.
And we also have Mr. Frank Howell K4FMH. Hi, Frank.
Hey, good to be with you guys.
Yeah, great. Unfortunately, Mr. Ed Durant, DD5LP, he's not very well today. He's got a dose of the nasty flu bug, so Ed won't be joining us today, but we wish him well and hopefully you get sorted soon. Our first news story is, Dan, you came up with this one, the new ARRL Chief Executive Officer elected by the Board of Directors. Mr. Howard E. Mickle, WB2ITX, is holding the role, Dan. Do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, so this is the latest story from the ARRL. Came out Monday morning. They've selected a new CEO. Looks to be, has an interesting background. Was a president of the IEEE and now serves as a chief technology officer for a robotics company out of China, oddly enough. And the big controversy here now, of course, is everybody's complaining that they don't think he's qualified as a ham to be CEO of the ARRL, which is kind of funny to me. He hasn't even gotten in the door yet, and some of the guys are hitting on him.
Well, I think based on his track record, it sounds like he's got lots of experience in some pretty senior roles in the technology world. And yeah, let's give the guy a chance, I suppose. I remember the ARRL, and absolutely, let's give the guy a chance. You can't just write somebody off just because their counter on KZ.com isn't as high as yours, so to speak. No,
but I have to wonder though. You say he's works for a robotics company in China. The risk of being cheeky, I do hope all of his products are type approved.
Good point. Touche. You think about what is his job, and without making an invidious comparison, I would say he has a better technical background than the short-lived previous CEO from Wall Street. I mean, frankly, not that comparison needs to be made, but since the new guy has been criticized, he certainly has a background in sort of technology organizations. And the league sometimes confuses itself with a for-profit business. I think they did last time. And yet, in fact, it's a nonprofit, and they get tax relief on that basis, and they're a membership organization. So I'm with Dan on this one, particularly those who read his blog post about it. If you care about the ARRL, and I'm a life member, you got to give the person a chance. And if he fails, he fails. But he certainly got the goods to occupy the office. I mean, Dave Sumner, who was there forever, what was his background other than being a ham? And everybody loved Dave. I mean, he put barnacles on the ship. So I'm with Dan on this one.
It helps, I guess, to be a ham, but also you don't have to be a ham to do the job as long as you've got the right advisors to help you out when you're thinking, actually, do you know what? I don't actually understand what this is. Help me out. Help me understand it.
You bet.
I said another thing that's really encouraging to me is his extensive experience with the IEEE, which is a membership-based nonprofit corporation. It's a lot bigger than the ARRL, which is another factor in his favor. And in 2011, he served as in a position called Vice President of Membership and Geographical Activities. And there's a link to a slide presentation he made while he was Vice President that showed some of the things he was working on at the time. And they include increasing membership engagement, and a third one, which escapes me right now. But these are all things that the ARRL really needs to make a priority now. So he's got the experience with that kind of thing. I say, let's see what he can do.
Dan's correct. The name of that presentation, and this is cited in, I think, Dan, in your blog. So listeners who want to go to your blog and read this, I would encourage them to. It's called Nuts and Bolts of Local Operations, Engaging the Member. Now, what's the comeuppance of all of the uproar of recent couple of years? The membership's been locked out. So, I'm with you, Dan. This guy has got the goods to at least be given, the opportunity. And he has some good ideas that he had for IEEE. If the board will let him implement this kind of vision, I think it can only help.
I agree with you guys totally. Let's give him a chance and see how he does. And in fact, I'm not the biggest operator in the world. I've not got the most lookups on QRZ. I'm not a particularly big contester. Doesn't mean I'm a bad ham. And equally, in the same light, if the guy's got the business skills and the other skills that the ARRL require, well then, as Dan and Frank said, let's give the guy a chance. He's got a track record of doing good things. I think he needs the support of all of us hams.
He's got my support.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So, I think we're all agreed on that one. Our second news story is still your side of the pond, guys. The FCC publishes a new Part 95 rules in the Federal Register, and it's all about power levels for the family radio service, and there's a little bit at the bottom about the law on CBers being allowed to operate outside the US and disregard the rule for the 155.3 mile rule, which we think most people did anyway, didn't we? Round to you, Frank, first on this one.
Well, hams, focus on Part 97 here in the States, and yet we have to live with Part 95. So changes there are certainly relevant to us. So sometimes I hear hams go, oh, Part 95, we don't need to worry about that. Well, in fact, we should. And the way I see this, from what I know about the FCC and that sort of thing, they look at these different services as, small fish in the pond, because they're not broadband, they're not digital television, that sort of thing. And I think they're just clarifying some of the particular uses by citizens, if you will, their constituents, to kind of clear up some of these things. Now, some would argue, why don't you just put all these in one pot and give different flavor licenses? Well, at some point they may do that. But in fact, these hit different kind of groups of people who may only want just to fill out a form and get a license. Some others may want to get more involved. But, the truckers, they love their CB radio here in the U.S.
Yeah, fine on that, Frank. But, my biggest problem in many ways is that I have no problem with CBers. There is an animosity between amateur radio and CB, both sides of the pond, I would suggest. But it's driven by both sides, and I can't understand it because we all want to play radio. What's your thoughts, Dan?
I don't see, again, where this going to make that much of a difference. Looking at this a little further, it looks like they're just sort of dropping the certification for the FRS radios. So that all that means to me is that really wasn't a problem anyway. And at less than 2 watts, yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, but it's increased the power from 0.5 watt to 2 watts. So, yeah, a little bit more, but you've got a much bigger country than we are over here. We're 0.5 watt over here, so on our license-free service. So there you go.
Well, I suppose it might make the FRS maybe a little bit more useful. I'm not sure. I'm guessing there must have been some people that have asked for it to be increased. I'm not sure if that's the manufacturers or the users, but there may have been some lobbying maybe to get that. There's always a kind of political angle, isn't there? There may be some lobbying perhaps to get that through. And I like Frank's comment about CBs. Yeah, I listened to the CBs in the States before. Some of them are quite funny actually on the trucks. I think a lot of truckers still use the old AM CBs over there, and it's quite amusing. In fact, there's also we mentioned previously on the podcast about network radio. There are actually now some network radio channels as well that are used by truckers as well, which is also quite amusing to listen into, shall we say.
Listen, you hit the nail on the head from my point of view, because one of the biggest complaints about FRS was the low wattage. And here's some groups that use them. Hunters use them. And they have, Vox on, and so they'll be whispering to one another about where the deer and the antelope and all this good stuff, are at, or the turkeys or whatever they're hunting. Families also hand out these little things. They pick them up. They go to one of these big theme parks like Disney World or Disneyland or something, and that's how they plan to keep up. If you got a caravan of cars, those are the kind of activities that generate lots of sales for this. So that 2 watt, is really not a bad thing. And I think you hit the nail on the head for the FCC. That's one of the clear reasons why they made that change.
Yeah, that sounds great, Frank. Martin, any thoughts?
Well, I have to say, we talk about more power for the FRS service. I hold a PMR license in the UK purely and simply because I needed more power. PMR 446, 0.5 watt here, didn't do it for me. America, obviously being a much bigger country, I guess out in the sticks, cell coverage isn't as good. And so, there are incentives there for people wanting more power. I totally get that. The things regarding the 155-mile rule on CB, did anybody ever follow that? I very much doubt it. And equally, to some extent, how would you know? CBs
I'm about to say that. How would you actually know unless the guy's telling you precisely where they are? Especially at 155 is it 0.3 miles? It's a very strange. There must be a reason for that, I'm guessing. But yeah.
But the other thing, of course, people probably ignoring that anyway, the distance anyway. I think, I'm out of pure interest. I'm a member of a couple of CB groups on Facebook, and the amount of people that I say, I see that are building massive amplifiers, and we're not talking 200-300 watts. We're talking 2, 3, 4, 5 kilowatt amps for CB. People are doing these things. You know it's stupid. I know it's stupid, but people do this and they build them at home and put them on the air. There's obviously a demand for a higher powered service, whatever it is. You do wonder why you need so much power when VHF radio do that with a tenth of that power. But
done a quick Google actually. The 155 point is actually 250 kilometers. So that's why it's 200. That's why it's that distance. And I believe that's probably to do with skip. To do with the horizon, how far you can possibly get without actually using skip. So maybe that's the difference.
Who was policing it? Someone coming on there from FCC saying, "You are talking further than you should. You must see some." Yeah, right.
Maybe. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, the other thing about having the mega amplifiers and that is they become crocodiles, all mouth and no ears, and. The number of people who just don't realise this, that you can't you're wasting your time trying to do some of these things that they want to do. But anyway, it's nice. It might, if the distance law becomes a reality, it might mean that we'll start to get a few new people looking at our hobby and going, well, it's great fun, this DX stuff. Maybe I'll have a go at amateur radio and maybe I'll get some extra frequencies. So could be worth a go.
Getting a burn off of your microphone every time you key it up.
Now. Oh, dear. Yeah.
Question that was raised the other day, and loads of people came back saying, "Yeah, you need to turn that power down."
Yeah.
There's kind of a famous movie here in the state called Christmas Vacation, I think, with Chevy Chase, and he gets into this thing with the Christmas lights.
Oh, yes, I remember that.
Yeah. I can imagine that 5 kilowatt like that.
Yeah, there's no need for it, is there, though? But anyway, let's move on. There's a new mode, and Bill mentioned it briefly about a couple of weeks ago, called FT8 Call. It's FT8 with chat, and effectively, it's a bit like a much, much slower version of PSK31. However, you can get right down in the noise with this. Now, haven't had a chance to play with it, but I've seen the videos, and I remember what Bill was saying. It's at alpha stage at the moment, but it certainly looks interesting. Mine, do you want to go first on this one?
Well, I haven't as yet installed it or had a play with it, but I do like the idea of it. I like the idea of FT8, but I've never installed it because I'm not really that interested in it. I played with Whisper. It's a very, very clever tool. It's a very, very clever toy. The way it works, it's impressive tech, but it's FT8. It's not for me. It's not something I'm particularly interested in. You know, the computer can chat to people all day. Well, so be it. Whisper, I like because you can see at least where it's going on a visual map. That's probably why I quite like its pictures. But chatting with a keyboard, I really like that. I got into the internet in the 90s when the modems became reachable, phone costs came down, and we got into things like MSN Messenger and things like that. And I really like that. We're hams, we like to talk. If I can chat with a keyboard, then even better. There are people on PSK and things. Some people are just giving you reports and I don't understand what any of this stuff means. Other people will sit and have a chat with you. I'd like to have a go with this. I think specifically if it can get down in the noise as well, that is making a product that is not, how can I say this nicely, not appealing to everybody, appeal to a lot more people. I'm not saying it's going to appeal to everyone, but at least those that don't care for FT8 because of the fact that it is just a reporting mode. It might appeal to a few more people that want to have a chat.
Yeah. Sounds fun. Dan, don't worry. I don't think it's going to do away with Morse. You're okay.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how popular it becomes, because I think part of the appeal of FT8 is that you don't have to talk to anybody. And so we'll see how many people adopt it. And if it's slower than PSK31, how much can you really say anyway?
Yeah, well, I thought when on the video I saw it was going over in packets, so it would send so many characters per over. So you might have, if you type, say, a string of text, it might take 4 transmission cycles to send that line of text. But hey, it looked interesting.
Oh, I'll give it a go. What the heck?
We're fortunate to have Joe Taylor being a ham. Joe Taylor was a professor at Princeton, won part of a Nobel Prize. And after he retired, this is what he focuses on for the most part. I had the pleasure of meeting him in Atlanta when he gave a talk there. And we are benefiting, whether we use a particular, whether it's Whisper, WSJT, or any of the variants, we're really benefiting from a really bright guy who's committed himself to amateur radio after his professional career.
Yeah.
I'm going to a talk, actually. Malta, were you there? I can't remember, with Joe. He came across to the UK 2 or 3 years ago and did a talk at the convention that the RSGB do every year. And, it was very interesting. I think, was it written in Fortran or something? Some quite old language now, I think. But,
yes, I think so.
It wasn't embarrassed, but it was quite interesting. He talked about a little bit about that. But yeah, very, very bright guy. But yeah, I guess this is just that next, things have evolved from Whisper, which I've used, not used for a while now. I used to use quite a lot. FT8's come along, and now FT8 Call, I think, could be very interesting, especially for those people that don't maybe have the best setup, perhaps the most amount of power to use, or perhaps the best aerial. That the fact it will work with a lot of noise or with not a very strong signal may just be, it may find a niche. I'm not sure, but I think the point Dan was making about the speed, that that people might try and get buttons, this is far too slow, I can actually operate at a faster rate with RTTY or PSK or something. But I think it'll be interesting. I think it's just the next iteration of this sort of line of I wouldn't say products, but this line of technology, which is I guess it's what it's all about. But I think it could be good, and let's try it and see when it comes out and see where it lands, shall we say?
Yeah, well, if you can work right down in the noise, which obviously you can, and you can get better DX. Those of you who are chasing awards, this is a proper QSO. It's a human QSO, so it could be a very, very good mode for those that are chasing awards, I would suggest.
I'm going to try it.
Yeah, I think I'll try it as well.
Interested if we can get an ICQ contact across the pond on this. Be interesting.
Well, I've had a contact across the pond on FT8, so I don't see why we couldn't.
Each other.
Yeah. Mind you, it might be difficult contacting you, Budgie, but...
I could get onto the meters.
Yeah. Anyway, sounds a good mode. Something I think is going to be quite interesting. It's at alpha stage at the moment, and as soon as it gets released fully, I'm going to download it and give it a good go, because my location is not particularly good for antennas and one thing or another. So, yeah, could be good for me.
And taking a little bit blue sky view on this, hey, we just had FT8 last summer. We're getting FT8 call this summer. Who knows what next summer will bring?
Absolutely.
Very true. Very true. Okay, moving on. Zello. Zello's a network radio application that you can run on your mobile phones, and you can get network radios. The Zello network has now been linked to the Southern Ireland repeater group. So effectively, some of the repeaters in Ireland are now going to be able to be used via effectively a mobile phone or a network radio. And obviously that means you can sit anywhere in the world and have a conversation with somebody via one of the Irish repeaters. Now, I'm pretty sure, and Chris, you've done a fair bit on Zello with me, there's going to be a moderator who's going to check up on us, won't there, Chris?
Yeah, I would think so. We discussed this before we started recording. I would expect, because otherwise I don't see how you could actually... You can't have people that are unlicensed on the amateur band, so I assume there is some sort of check as a license maybe. So I'd imagine it'll be a private group, private channel, I think they call it in Zello, don't they? And you'll have to be authorised to... transmit, and part of that would be that the person has a license check, that's all. So I'd imagine that's the way it works. But it sounds quite interesting, the fact you've got that connection between... it just sounds similar, I was saying earlier, about it just sounds similar to Echolink in the fact that you can come out and repeat it somewhere via an app, essentially, which is what Echolink allows you to do, in one of the ways it works. So... yeah, it does sound interesting, and we'll see if anybody else does this as well going forward.
Yeah, I think it's another interesting thing. Mine, what's your thoughts?
I will be honest, I saw this coming, and I think I even mentioned it when you did a talk on it at our club. To me, this is almost the D-Star Fusion DMR argument again. What repeater is going to support what technology? Because we've already got a perfectly good internet linking system, Echolink. We've got another one, ARRL. Now we've got Zello. And again, we've got sort of different competing technologies. I mean, okay, in the digital world, we've got things like CQ UK, which bring them together. But I don't know. I'd be interested to see how well this is picked up. I mean, I personally gave up with Zello. The app's just too buggy for me. It doesn't work very well on my phone. But considering there are radio-style devices available, and let's face it, they are just Android phones in a radio head unit or in a radio-shaped box with a PTT button, I can see why people would be interested in this. But, of course, you are still reliant on the 3 and the 4G networks or Wi-Fi in your house for it to work. But, if the people that are in that area play with Zello a lot and they travel a lot, then I guess the ability to get onto their repeater and chat to their friends is there. Although if you're going to do that, then why not just get your friends to install Zello and leave the repeater for someone else to use? I don't know. Maybe I'm being too negative on that.
Yeah, I think it has a place, Martin. I mean, I won't... Well, all right, I will mention it. Chris often contacts me on Zello, which is quite interesting because he'll give me a call and suddenly hear this voice coming from your pocket, and you think, "Oh, what's that? Oh, it's Chris." But it works very well. Frank, have you had any experience of this network radio and Zello and that sort of stuff?
Not with Zello. Of course, as we mentioned in the pre-broadcast discussion, I certainly used the EchoLink app on my iPhone. But what I see in this is perhaps less focused on this particular repeater network, but more on the sort of transport that's available on phones, especially as they may be used with other linking systems, such as broadband mesh networks and things. I think the MCOM groups are beginning to tinker with these kind of things so that they may have some very cheap Android phones. They've got an app like Zello on them. They connect by microwave when, everything's down, and they can hand them to the government personnel and say, hey, we can communicate. These phones will connect from here, there, and yonder. So I see it a little more as being exciting in that realm than the narrower focus that our current story has on a particular repeater network. But I've not really had any direct experience with Zello.
All right. Well, to say, some of the groups are quite interesting. They seem very polite, as I said when I did the feature on it. They're very polite and they're interesting groups. And I would say probably 70% of the people on them actually hold amateur radio call signs. Now, obviously, this Irish group, you're probably going to have to prove you're an amateur. But there you go. Dan, what's your thoughts? Are you going to have a go at this or not?
Well, I haven't used Zello in the past, but if it's a free app, I'll download it and play with it. I think that, people are talking about, well, is this like worth doing? I think this falls into the category, we can do it, so we did it, if you know what I mean. Right?
Yeah.
It may not be the greatest thing since sliced bread, but hey, we did it.
In 5 years from now, we may have an as yet unknown application where this is killer. I mean, we just don't know. That's why experimentation, as Dan's saying, can be very productive. Sometimes it goes in the junk box and never comes out, but we don't know.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I did a club talk on network radio about a month ago, I think it was, and it was very controversial. It was, at the end of the day, I didn't draw the conclusion I think everybody was waiting for. I think a number of people were waiting for me to say, yeah, this is the one to do. We do it this way. And when you talk about network radio, yeah, if you take, for instance, that's effectively what EchoLink was or is, and a lot of other things that have come and gone through the mix. So, yeah, as you're right, there could be something completely different happening. Is it real amateur radio? Probably not. My argument was it depended on how you entered or left the system. This group in Ireland, where you are actually leaving the system with amateur radio RF, it's probably, I'd say that's real amateur radio. If we had a one-to-one like Chris and I do occasionally, no, that's not amateur radio at all. So it's how you enter and exit the system.
And in fact, my brother, I introduced to Zello, and he actually calls me out now on Zello. He's not an amateur. Never had a license, not really interested in getting a license, although you never know, this might be the sort of thing that might get him interested. So yeah, I'm sort of getting people outside to use it as an introduction almost to what radios like to use.
Yeah. So I think it's a good thing. Moving on, the Austrian OVSV, which is the Austrian Amateur Radio Society, replied to the government that kind of put amateur radio down as only a toy. And I can imagine the Austrian Society getting very upset about this. Chris and I have both spoken at length with the president of the Austrian Amateur Radio Society a number of times, and they are really trying to drag things forward. And then I reckon this was written by somebody that knew nothing about our hobby or radio, and their response was pretty good, wasn't it, Chris?
Yeah, so yeah, we've met Mike. I interviewed him not long ago, actually. I think we heard it on the podcast a few episodes ago. Nice guy, and I'm sure he was involved in this response. So yeah, I'm not sure who wrote this in the government over in Austria, but Unfortunately, it's not. I'm looking at the press release now from the government department, but unfortunately, it's not in English. It's in Austrian, possibly German, and so Google Translate is translating. It's not doing a particularly good job. So I'm not really sure exactly what it says. So it's the Federal Ministry of Transport, Innovation and Technology that this was written by, but obviously they've taken exception to it, and quite rightly, as a national society, they've responded. So I guess that's their job, isn't it, to sort of defend and to uphold our rights. So let's. I'm glad that they've done that.
Yeah, so am I. Dan, what's your thoughts?
Well, I think this should serve as a wake-up call to the OVSV. Obviously, they're not keeping in touch with their government regulatory body well enough.
Yeah. Well, as I say, you have to keep the two-way communications open, and there's a lot of people who don't understand our hobby. Frank, thoughts on this one?
Very similar to what's been said. The OVSV sort of has their marching orders, to promote amateur radio in Austria. They need to make sure that the ministry that sort of regulates and establishes their parameters needs to know about them. And who knows? There's probably a licensed ham or two actually in that agency. But when these things come out of agencies, you don't know who's squeezing the tube of toothpaste, so to speak. And so that thing could have gotten out, and there may be much more appreciation within that agency. But when these things come out, who knows who reviewed it? So they have their job cut out for them, but I'm sure they'll do it because they've been punched in the nose inadvertently anyway. So
yeah. So I think you put it well, Martin. What's your thoughts on this one?
Amateur radio classed as a toy. It is a toy. Come on, we all know men never grow up. It's just the toys get more expensive. Emma said to me, the other day, what have you been up to? I replied, playing with my toys, and I'm referring to my amateur radio stuff. But to be honest, it does seem unfair for it to officially be classed as a toy, because let's face it, there is nothing amateur about amateur radio other than the name. I saw a YouTube video once, and he said in any other realm, we'd be called professionals, because in the end of the day, who is it that knows how to set these systems up? It's the amateurs. Who is, the only reason we're not called professional radio people is because there are people that make money out of it. That's why we are classed as amateur. This has clearly been, written by someone that doesn't understand, that doesn't get it. But, good for the Austrian society to put things right. And, in reality, it's another reason, wherever you are in the world, whatever country you're in, to become a member of your national body, be they the RSGB, the ARRL, or whoever, because this is the kind of thing that they will stick up for. And believe you me, they will have your back.
Yeah. So I think, good on Michael and the guys over at the Austrian Amateur Radio Society for fighting their corner. Feelings are you've got to get closer, Michael. So we're not picking the fight, but we feel you need to get a bit closer. Next news story, young radio hams earn awards. And this is the Young Ham of the Year award that was set up in memory of Bill Pasternak, WA6ITF. Frank, you were there when the awards were being given out, weren't you?
Yes, the Huntsville Ham Fest at the Von Braun Center there in Huntsville is a great ham fest. They kind of claim to be the friendliest ham fest in the country. I can't dispute that. And there are two groups that sort of sponsor this. One is Amateur Radio Newsline, which has been going on for just an incredible number of years. And the namesake for this award, Bill Pasternak, passed away a couple of years ago. CQ Magazine and the editor Rich Moseson also sponsors this. And I'm always impressed. I always stop and kind of get front and center to watch these young people because they're just always very impressive. Now, there were 3 awards, and they're all, very bright young people. But Bryant Rascal, KG5HVO, is the 2018 Young Ham of the Year award. Now, he was a participant in the 2018 World Radio Sport Championship in Wittenberg, Germany, among other things. He got licensed when he was 11. and became, an extra class about three years later. And he's now the youth coordinator in the state of Alabama. So, at a young age, he's very integrated into the amateur radio world and organization. So it's a very nice presentation. I'm very pleased that CQ Magazine helped sponsor that, and Amateur Radio Newsline with Don Wilbanks primarily sort of present that award. And they're just bright young people, and they're going places and already have been places.
Yeah, it's good news that we're awarding people that do extraordinary things. I agree with that. Dan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm always amazed at these kids too. And when I got my license, I was 16 and I barely knew which end of the soldering iron to hold. So, these kids are just head and shoulders above where I was at that age.
Dan, there's a hot end and a cold end.
Oh, shoot.
We need to tell some marketing people, though. We've all seen those pictures on Facebook and elsewhere.
Yeah. And I tell you, Dan, if you pick a soldering up by the hot end, a number of things happen. A, you drop it very quickly. B, you say some very naughty words. And C, the smell is horrible. It takes ages to
kind of bacon smell, isn't it? Yeah.
It's horrible. Anyway. Yeah.
Smells like chicken, you're holding it wrong.
Yes.
Yeah. Chris, your thoughts on this one?
Well, I think it's great that we got young people that are really enthusiastic and talented that have been rewarded and encouraged to continue in the hobby. Certainly in this country, I don't know if there actually are any specific awards for youth in this country. I can't think of any. I know young Lauren M6HLR, that I know we spoke to before on the podcast. I think she got an award, but I wasn't sure that was a specific one for the fact she was young and doing things in the hobby, or whether it was just a sort of more general award. But I think that's probably something we should perhaps think about in this country, is actually having awards for young people getting involved in the hobby.
Yeah.
Start an ICQ podcast award for young hams in the UK.
Yeah, we can set it up.
We'll have to talk to Colin, but we can do it. No, we can do anything.
We're just volunteering for it. It'll be fine.
Shh, don't tell him.
Don't tell him. Well, he doesn't listen to this bit. Probably no, he does.
It's the way to find out, though, isn't it? We'll stick it in there and see if he comments.
Hey, you've got to behave yourself because you're with him in about a month's time.
Oh, yeah.
Let's see, who's not on the podcast? We can blame them with it.
Oh, let's blame Leslie. Everybody blames
Leslie. Oh, yeah,
Leslie.
All right, I say. But a really good news story that the young guys are doing outstanding things. Last news story, the National Frequency Coordinating Council is now defunct. Frank, you told us about this one. I'm going to let you go first.
Okay, just to back up so everybody's on kind of the right page, frequency, nobody owns a frequency. And when we have radio repeaters, they tend to be set on certain pairs of frequencies for obvious reasons, so you know where they are, both geographically and in terms of the input and output frequency. Well, given that no one owns it, we have to play nice. We have to cooperate. The American Radio Relay League, kind of being the lobby group in the U.S. for amateur radio, they've never wanted to be in the frequency coordinating business. It sort of makes too many people mad and that sort of thing. But too many repeater owners were going to the FCC over complaints with interference, where one repeater would get into another. So in 2013, the ARRL got an MOU with the FCC to help start a nonprofit that was independent, the National Frequency Coordinators Council in Minneapolis, is where the legal body was based. I think the last president was actually located in Texas. So it was their job to do what I call the mum may I, or mother may I here in the States. If you want to coordinate repeaters in your area, say a state or several states or what have you, then you would agree to follow certain guidelines that the NFCC put down for good best practices. And they said, thou shalt be a coordinating body. The Southeastern Repeater Association, SARA, is the largest such body in the United States. I was an officer with them representing my state of Mississippi for a while. So that's the context. But the NFCC ran into problems that a number of volunteer groups run into, and the ARRL served notice on them a few years ago that we're going to end this MOU if you don't, kind of get your act together. Well, they didn't. And they, in fact, have gone out of business, according to the Secretary of State's office in Minnesota. So the punchline is no one is there now to say you can be a coordinating body. And you might think, well, why do we need to fix something that's not broke? Au contraire. In the state of Florida, there was a big row involving multiple lawsuits over that frequency coordinating body because they just sort of didn't do their business. So here we have the ARRL having started what was a good thing. It's ended. It's now defunct. And there's sort of nobody sort of asleep at the wheel, I guess you would say. And that's where we are. And it's inevitably going to result in more conflict over, repeater frequencies and that sort of thing. So in a nutshell, nobody's minding the store.
Right. So that's quite a major problem then, I'd suggest. Dan, you also, your side of the pond. What's your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so I think maybe we should give the new CEO this as his first job. to come up with some kind of national frequency coordinating committee. No, I agree. It could be a serious issue. I mean, there are lawsuits, and I think this is another sort of indication of how poorly repeaters are used. I mean, just the fact that nobody seems real upset about it just shows how little repeaters are used here anymore.
I think that the fact that you guys have independent repeaters or private repeaters and not private repeaters is partially the problem. Maybe somebody needs to look at it and say, what's the traffic you're getting through these? And maybe consolidation in an area. So instead of lots of people doing their own thing, get together and put one decent repeater on rather than half a dozen clagging the frequencies, I suggest.
That we started a new country across the pond for that very type of reason.
Yeah, I was going to say, with all due respect, fat chance of that happening.
Yeah, it's probably a fat chance of that happening, but people don't do what I do.
Although it does make complete sense, Martin. I mean, your logic is impeccable.
Oh, I have occasionally I get something right, Frank. Occasionally.
But to help make Dan's point, and I'm sure you have this in the UK and elsewhere. From my understanding, is that the repeater trustee is the person registered with the FCC as being in charge of a repeater, and I'm the trustee for several here, and so I own that. I own the responsibility for that. Now, I may not literally own the equipment. In some cases, I do. But if Dan were on my repeater and I just took a notion and said, Dan, you can't use my repeater, then basically, technically, he's not supposed to use that repeater, even though I don't own that frequency. And how's that for a conundrum, Dan? So if you don't have someone in the role that the NFCC was in, or who can designate coordinating bodies, you see what can happen here. No one owns a frequency, but a trustee owns access to a repeater.
And it hasn't happened yet. But what if, like we here in Michigan, we have the Michigan Amateur Repeater Association. What's to stop me from setting up the Southeast Michigan Amateur Repeater Association and saying, hey, I'm the coordinating authority here in Southeast Michigan. I'll do what I want.
And here's what the current, because I've checked into this and I've talked with the people in Florida that were in the lawsuit on another network, as they say, on another podcast. There's nothing stopping you. All you have to do is get some number, and that's undefined, some number of repeater trustees like me to say, hey, Dan, I want to follow you. I want you to coordinate my repeater. And then it's between you and that other group to kind of battle out how you're going to work that. See how unwieldy that gets just very easily.
Yeah. I've got to think that the amateur service obviously is not a protected service. There has got to be someone in the FCC that is doing this role for PMR and commercial repeaters for,
there is
and stuff like that. Surely they should be in the first mission. They're trained to do this. They obviously have the software on their computers. They have mapping tools and stuff like that. Surely they're in a position, they'd be the right people to do it. You mentioned one repeater getting into another. That's, to me, is too much power to some extent. I mean, I know in America that some repeaters, I'm pretty sure, run hundreds of watts. In the UK, our repeaters, I think, are limited to 25. In fact, XP just has 2. Granted, it's not going to be an easy task for someone to do, but someone at the FCC who is ultimately responsible for the airwaves, a government-elected body, surely they need to be turning around and say, actually, no, we do need to have a central body doing this. You can't just go and pick frequencies willy-nilly. We can't do it willy-nilly. There's nothing to say I couldn't set up, for argument's sake, on 2 meters, a repeater. Okay, it's sort of an agreement that you don't go and do it, and you don't go and do it on top of other frequencies. But okay, argument's sake, 70 SEMS. It's a band. We've got lots of bandwidth there that we can play with. I could set up a repeater for a day as long as it's identifying with my call sign. There's nothing to say that I couldn't do it. I know if you're going to have a permanent installation, you need to get it licensed and properly, but you could just do it. But we've got a central body that says you can have it. I don't understand why the FCC aren't getting involved.
You make again, to repeat myself, an impeccable argument, and who could argue against that, except the FCC won't allocate the resources, and this group called the ARRL says, we represent amateur radio. We will get hams to cooperate. And we kind of have. I mean, I'm not saying that we don't cooperate, but you have all these aberrations. Every club in America, once they get a successful club, now, Dan, I want you to weigh in on this because you've been a club liaison. Every club, what's the second thing they want? Hey, let's get our own repeater. And yet they don't think about, okay, we're using 3 other repeaters that we already have, but there's a status symbol of a club having their own repeater. And in the northeast part of the U.S., we're a little different than, say, the U.K., in that the U.K. might be equivalent geographically to, say, the northeastern part of the U.S., but yet 2-meter pairs are totally saturated and have been for a long time. Many repeater trustees did not want to bother with PL tones to give you a little more protection, and so on and so on. And there's 2 factors, as you said. The FCC doesn't want to do it, and they bought the argument of the ARRL that we can get people to cooperate, except we, the ARRL, we don't want to be the coordinators.
Okay, can I just ask a question? Do you pay for your license in America?
Which license are we talking about?
Your ham radio license, do you pay for it?
Yes, we pay a fee for the individual license. Now, for the repeater license...
We don't anymore.
Do you know?
Well, it's free now.
Yeah, well, correct. But we have. I was giving him an answer. But for the repeater license, we don't.
Yeah, okay. So I would
pay to get it coordinated.
Service. If you're paying for your license, you've got some argument to go back to the FCC. Now, we don't pay for our licenses in the UK. I can't really go to Ofcom and complain that I'm not getting something because, let's face it, I'm getting all this space for free. Even if you're paying a token $15 or whatever it is to the FCC, I'd argue that you could go back to them and push them. They may push it out to the ARRL, but surely it's still down to the FCC to push the ARRL and say, guys, you are not doing your job properly. Pull your fingers out or not recognize you as a national body.
Well, you make a good point. And I think on a previous podcast, we talked about the official observer program. And I think the ARRL is, in fact, moving their gears toward doing something. We discussed that previously, and it's a parallel issue, intentional interference and misbehavior of that sort of thing. Now we've got repeaters, and you make the same point, and I totally agree with you. And I'm kind of nudging through my comments here, the ARRL, and Dan was half joking, but I think half serious, that the new CEO needs to take this up because you're right. The ARRL needs to do something about a Mother May I body to recognize coordinating entities.
And it may not be the ultimate authority on that, just like it's not the ultimate authority on licensing, right? It's the National Council of Volunteer Examiner Coordinators, but they play a part in it, and they probably were a moving force in getting that set up. We needed something just similar to that for repeater coordinators.
So there you go.
Do you have problems in the UK over this?
Not so much. I mean, Martin, you're the repeater keeper. We did have one problem with repeater in Cambridge, because bearing in mind London and Cambridge must be about 60 miles apart, and GB3XP, when it had a CTS-CSS fault, was hijacking users from the Cambridge repeater. Bear in mind it only runs 2 watts, but...
Well, wait, if you stand where the aerial is for XP, and bear in mind that you can't get to the bottom of the aerial because it's on a big pole on the roof of the building, but you can probably see Cambridge, or I don't know if it's Cambridge, it was over that way anyway. But yeah, I mean, you can hear it, and from time to time when there's a lift on, you do hear repeaters coming in on the same frequencies. But the only problem I've known that we've had is we had a problem with the CTCSS board, and which basically meant you didn't need CTCSS to open up XP, and then you could effectively hear, people opening up. It was opening up all sorts of stuff. It was odd how it was happening, but you could just hear it in the background all the time.
But predominantly, we don't tend to have problems with repeaters because in the UK, the RSGB coordinators do it for Ofcom. Chris, what's your thoughts?
Well, I think as a job, if your job is to coordinate, I think it's a thankless task in a way. I think it's an important task, but I think it's fairly, like you say, political, thankless kind of job. It's kind of admin type job, but it's an important one. Just one of the things that I mentioned earlier about private repeaters. Now, I don't believe we have private repeaters here in the UK. And I think Dan's point about, well, actually, you'll be given a frequency pair here, so why should you be given that to then have it for yourself? Interestingly, I did remember seeing something on the internet where there was some disagreement between a repeater keeper and a user, and he said, look, you're banned from my repeater, which technically you can't do. But the point was it was actually a digital repeater, and he was using the Computer Misuse. He said, right, okay, under the Computer Misuse Act, you're using my computer, which happens to be a repeater, and my internet connection, therefore you're not allowed to use it anymore. So that's what he said. Now, whether that was enforceable is another matter, but that was and I'm not sure when that was years ago now, but I don't know where it's just an interesting, the idea, as Dan was saying, that you can actually be given a pair of frequencies and that's then yours, and it's kind of private to you. So, but yeah, my overall thoughts are, it's not really it's a fairly thankless task doing that sort of work, unfortunately, I should imagine.
But you're not being given you're given the frequencies, but in reality, you could give, I'm going to give you a pair of frequencies for a repeater. The repeater keeper could say, I don't want you using my repeater, I don't want you using my equipment, whatever. There's nothing to say you couldn't just switch on radio on that same frequency and operate.
And your point, both of you make points about the irreconcilability of the facts of the parameters, if you will, that no one owns that frequency, but you've got one body who has no true authority. They have no ultimate authority, a frequency coordinating body in the U.S. All they're doing is try to herd the cats into a certain formation that, okay, you can't use this one, pretty please, because we're going to give you this other frequency pair over here, and everybody can play until we get saturated. And so you don't own the frequency, but you may own the repeater. And we have one repeater trustee said, no Belfong HTs on my repeater. The quality's terrible. And he may have a point. However, just think of the capriciousness of that. So, now what I'm hearing, which is interesting, is that you're saying that the RSGB actually does have coordinating people.
Yes.
See, the ARRL is taking the opposite approach. We don't want to do it.
So I think in the UK, the RSGB is kind of takes on a number of, I think the Ofcom, which is kind of our equivalent of the FCC, kind of delegates certain tasks to the RSGB. So I think one of them is that repeater coordination activity. There are others. There are certain licensing tasks, like, for example, issuing NOVs, which allows you to use your license for certain things as well. Some of those are also delegated down to the RSGB. I think because the RSGB is kind of our representative in to the rest of the country, and I suppose as Martin was saying, because we don't pay for our license, maybe it's a way of actually getting things, perhaps something done a bit more efficiently without incurring the cost of the taxpayer.
The other thing is we're a much, much smaller country and a lot less hams, therefore, and the fact that we can't have private repeaters means that we're probably not going to hit the same problems in the States. However, when I was in negotiation to get the frequencies for GB3XP for the club, it was quite a hard negotiation to find a pair of frequencies that weren't in use. So it's an awkward one, guys. But I think, Dan, you're right. Your man needs to maybe pick this one up fairly early on. I know you were possibly joking, but your man needs to.
No, I agree. I think he should. That would be a good thing for him to do first.
Won't be popular, but a good thing. Okay.
Tells people to move frequencies. That won't go down well.
Oh, no.
Okay. And you will turn your power down. What?
Yeah. Okay. I think we've done that one to death, guys, but it's certainly an interesting discussion. There'll be more bits and pieces on our website and web links for you to look up if you fancy having a greater look at it. Okay, guys. Let's go around the table quickly and find out what you've been up to since the last time you were on. Frank, do you want to go first?
Oh, I've been doing some of my scientific research, been wrestling with satellite data and some things there. It will lead into some research on amateur radio, the kinds of neighborhoods and things that hams live in. And that's occupied a good bit of my time the last couple of weeks.
Right, so that's kept you busy. That's a good one, and sounds like interesting. Look forward to hearing about the results when you've got them. Martin, you've been away on holiday.
I have.
Have you done much radio, though?
A little bit of D-Star, a little bit of Fusion. Had a nice long chat with somebody whose call sign I forget on 80 meters the other day. That was nice. Of course, I've been broadcasting on the 3 and the 1.25 and the 500 meter band, but that doesn't really class as amateur radio because that is professional radio. I had a bit of an issue with the server that serves GB3XP for Fusion, and the fact that I have TeamViewer to get into it remotely. Just basic administration on it. It sits in my house, but it's just not in my shack with me. And TeamViewer suddenly decided randomly that I was using it commercially. And I've opened a case with them to say, I'm not commercial, I do this for free, but I'm going to be using another product because they've not been particularly helpful towards me so far. But other than that, that's pretty much it radio-wise. I have got to give a mention, though. I mentioned to our colleague Bill, just because there have been some great photos appearing of him on Facebook in the loudest T-shirt in the world. I thought I had some pretty loud T-shirts, but hats off to Bill for pulling that off.
Right, I'm checking now on Facebook, Bill. Here we go.
I got the same TeamViewer notice, by the way.
Okay. They're obviously
I have too many computers in my household, and I think that's why they ping me.
But they said, like, you're using your phone, and you're using your phone to access this. It's commercial, and well, occasionally I connect from work through, I guess, the work's Wi-Fi. But irrelevant of that, you didn't ask me if I'm using it commercially.
Right.
So, there is another one. I forget what it's called that people are recommending that you use. Have I got it on here? No, I've not got it on here. I forget what it was, but people are saying, hey, use this instead. This is a lot better. So I'm going to give that a go.
I'm actually looking now, by the way, at the T-shirt. Wow. Was that for a bet or something, Bill? Sorry.
I'll play to him. He's done well, hasn't he?
Yeah, that's a good one. Dan, what have you been up to since the last episode?
So I once again joined my Canadian friends at the Point Clark Lighthouse for the International Lighthouse and Lightship Weekend. And I've also joined the Amateur Radio Lighthouse Society. And I was assigned member number 2000, even 2000. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Wow.
That's a good number to have, Dan.
Did you pull strings for that?
No, I'm just luck of the draw.
So
anyway, I'm looking forward now to activating more lighthouses in and around Michigan. That's where I live. The little factoid here: Michigan has the most lighthouses of any state in the union.
I would not have guessed that.
There are 210 lighthouses in the state of Michigan.
Wow.
Well, that'll keep you
cool.
busy. That'll keep you busy for a few weeks, Dan.
It sure will. So that's my goal, one of my life goals here now.
So it'll be Dan on the air from a lighthouse. Pretty
from
much
Whitefish
every weekend.
Point, from Sturgeon Point, we have a lot of fish points here. Sturgeon Point, Point O'Bark. There's one there. That's one that's not too far from here.
Yes.
Belle Isle. So anyway,
good.
that's it.
Yeah, sounds good. Chris, what have you been up to?
Well, we've been again to HS Belfast, which was, I think I say it's every episode done to now pretty much, so that's probably not big news. We had quite a good talk recently at the Radio Club on SOTA from Richard, G8ITB. In fact, I've been a bit inspired actually to go and try it myself. I've actually ordered one of these Life Pro 4 batteries and a charger, etc. So I'm actually going to go out and give that a try sometime. Hopefully the weather's going to be kind to us. The weather seems to have turned a little bit over here, and hopefully things might recover a little bit. And I also bought a 7-meter fishing pole recently as well as an aerial support. So I think I've got, when the battery arrives and get all that sorted out, I think I pretty much got what I need to go out and have a play with SOTA. So I can give that a try. Other things, we've now resurrected our Club Net, which are now running from the Club Repeater, GB3XP. So that's been the last 2 or 3 weeks. That's good. Getting on the air a little bit with that. I know, Martin, you've been on that as well. And the big thing that's coming up is for SSB Field Day, which is the big annual contest that we get involved with as a club. So I seem to have been project managing that. So we've got a few things to sort out for that one. Hopefully, again, the weather will be okay. The forecast looks okay for the weekend, so that's this weekend. In fact, it'll be the day this comes out will be the second day of that contest. So listen out for our, if you're interested, our club call sign, which will be G7SAC/P. Please give us some points. So that's all good, but yeah, it'll keep us busy for this weekend at least. So yeah, that's what I've been up to, and that's what we'll be up to. So round to you, Martin.
Yeah,
you'll like the LifePro battery. I've got a 20 amp hour in a small case. It's wonderful.
Okay, cool, very good.
Yeah, I'm waiting to see it, Frank. So it'll be interesting. Well, you're right. Chris and I do a lot of things because Chris, Martin, and I are all from the same club, so we do a lot of things together. And I went to the Belfast with you, Chris. I actually operated, which is quite rare for me to do. And yes, I did operate FT8. And at the end of the day, I had 50 contacts. And it got infectious towards the end. And it's like, I think you guys thought I was a bit of a pain when I got, no, I've got a 49. I've got to get the 50th. But it was worth doing. And I can't remember if I said last time where Chris got his fishing pole from. We did go down to a rally a couple of weeks ago, and it got washed out and was pretty miserable, unfortunately. So we did other things, Carol and I, but it wasn't particularly good. And last Sunday, Bank Holiday Sunday, Colin and I were guests of the RSGB at the National Radio Centre up in Bletchley Park, and we've recorded some audio and some video which will appear on a later podcast. I think it's going to be too much for Colin to cut it up sensibly for this episode, so I've got another thing in the bag for this episode. So a bit of fun there, and it's once again it was another wet Sunday, and actually one of the guys that turned up and started chatting to us in the Bletchley Park Radio Centre was actually gone to the Milton Keynes rally, and it had been washed out. So I feel sorry for guys who've gone to rallies over the last few weekends when it's rained. It ain't been too good. Prior to that, it was red hot. But anyway, sounds like we've all done something very, very good over the last few months. Okay, I'd like to thank you all for joining us. I'd like to thank Mr. Frank Howell K4FMH. Thanks, Frank.
Thanks for having me back again.
No problems, Frank. Mr. Martin Rothwell M0SGL.
Great to be back.
Yeah, missed you because you've been away for a while as well.
I have, yes.
Yeah, I'll let you off though. Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU. Good to have you back again, Dan.
You're very welcome, Martin.
No probs. And Mr. Chris Howard M0TCH.
Cheers, guys. Yeah, another fun episode. Thank you very much.
No probs. Okay, we'll do it all again soon. 73s.
73.
73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
Now it's time to have a look at the news in brief with me, Colin M6BOY. And we start off with news here, probably for people that are in the Midlands to North London sort of area in the UK. The RSGB's National Radio Centre at Bletchley Park is seeking recruit volunteers, particularly looking for people who can help them over weekends. So as I say, we'll certainly put a link to the vacancies that are available. If you'd like to help out, certainly make contact with the RSGB. And if you'd like to find out more about the National Radio Centre, listen into the next episode where we'll be doing a feature on our visit recently to the National Radio Centre. If you'd like to get more of a flavour of what goes on at the NRC. Members of the Pontefract and District Amateur Radio Society are currently active using the call sign GB250CC, and they'll be running that through till September the 28th, for they're celebrating 250th anniversary of Captain Cook's first voyage to the Pacific, which spanned the era and dates of 1768 to 1771. Cook sailed out of Plymouth on the ship Endeavour, and as I say, the group there will be commemorating that journey with the call sign GB250CC. So certainly feel free to welcome. QSLs are via Golf Zero Bravo Papa Kilo direct, or via the Bureau. You're also using Logbook of the World and EQSL as well. And finally, we head off to Malta for the news in brief here, where there is news of introductions of new amateur radio regulations, which may ban the use of amateur satellite services in their allocation. Now, there's been a recent consultation period, and the Maltese Amateur Radio League said most of the proposed changes have been recommended by the MARL over the last few years. And I say this includes lifetime licenses and also compatibility with HAREC. But it's understood that, as I say, they're still trying to get an entry-level license involved as well, but this hasn't yet passed. Some of the anomalies of the proposed regulations is between 29.3 and 29.510 being restricted to satellite downlink only. 435 to 438 megahertz, as I say, is not permitted. And as I say, this is obviously an area which is very popular for amateur radio allocation for satellites. And also no permission as well between 2400 and 2450 megahertz as well, again on the satellite allocation there. So there seems to be some missing areas out on satellite networking. We'll pop all the links that you need on icqpodcast.com for you to check out, and say certainly to keep it interesting in what's going on in Malta. Well, now we heard of a feature in this episode, which is a feature on loudspeakers for amateur radio. I hope you enjoy.
And now, what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast. Hi guys, for this episode I wanted to look at loudspeakers for ham radio. Now, when we buy our rigs, 9 times out of 10 they have a little loudspeaker fitted in the case of the device. And sure enough, it works. Let's be honest, it works very well. But it depends on where you're going to mount your radio. For argument's sake, the base of my radio in the car is in the trunk or the boot. The head unit's in the front of the car. And it would be no good trying to use the onboard loudspeaker with my mobile. However, there are lots of options we can do. Now, lots of people look at the matching loudspeakers that the big manufacturers produce. So the big three all produce lovely looking rigs, and to make it look nice and neat and tidy, they come up with matching speakers. Now, they're not always the best speaker, and they're often very, very expensive. Another tip for you is, when you look at a loudspeaker, have a look at others, because I've often seen loudspeakers from one of the big three manufacturers that's just been badge engineered, and you can find a similar device that looks absolutely identical without the manufacturer's logo on it for a quarter of the price. So, worth a look, guys. So, not knocking the big three manufacturers, but they have a opportunity to get it right as well. Now, commercially, there's a number of loudspeakers you could go buy off the shelf, but before you rush out and buy an external loudspeaker, I think you have to start to work out what you want. Now, do you want an amplified speaker or a non-amplified speaker? Well, this kind of works out whether you're going to drive your loudspeaker from the external loudspeaker socket, in which case you probably don't need amplification, or if you're going to pick your audio up off the back accessory socket, in which case you probably will need amplification. So that's the first thing you need to think about. Now, for mobile rigs, you're always going to be picking it up off the external speaker socket, because I don't think it's easy to pick it up anywhere else. However, for a base station, you may very well pick up the audio closer off the accessory socket at the back. Now, what do you do? Well, there's a number of options you could do. There's new or versus second hand. Now, often when you go to rallies, there's often guys selling bucket loads of little loudspeakers, ex-mobile phone type installation loudspeakers for portable rigs. So that could be one option. There are also often you'll find external speakers for all sorts of radios. And once again, it's buyer beware if you're buying second hand. But there's a few things I can give you a suggestion on. Now, one of the things you need to look at from a technical point of view is the impedance of the loudspeaker. If your radio requires an 8 ohm impedance loudspeaker, then it needs to be an 8 ohm. If you put a 4 ohm on, it will probably cause the audio amplifier quite a bit of aggravation and may eventually over time burn it out, because it's driving into a much smaller load. However, when you're looking at those sort of things, it's worth keeping that in mind. The other one that's also very, very important is the power rating of the speaker. If your audio amplifier on your radio has, say, a 3-watt audio amplifier, and you put a 0.5 watt speaker on, the speaker winding in the coil of the speaker is going to get hot. If it gets hot, it distorts. I'll come on to that a little bit later. So, looking at the power rating of your radio output and the speaker you're going to put on it is also something you need to keep an eye on. Now, I mentioned impedance earlier. If you need an 8 ohm speaker and you've got 2 4 ohm speakers, you can obviously put those in series. And just because the speaker says it's an 8 ohm speaker, you won't measure 8 ohms on your multimeter, because it's impedance, not resistance. So just be aware of that. And you can always put them in series. However, if you put a set of loudspeakers in series, and certainly if they're in the same box, you're going to make sure they're phased correctly, because you don't want one pushing and one pulling. Because if they're in the same box and you've got one pushing and one pulling, you're effectively going to cancel your audio out. So just keep an eye on that one if you're fitting 2 loudspeakers in series in the box. The audio bandwidth. We don't need hi-fi. Alright, if you pick up a hi-fi speaker and it's a reasonable price, that's fine. But you don't need hi-fi for the sort of things we do. After all, normally on SSB, your highest frequency you're going to actually listen to is about just over 3 kilohertz. So having a speaker with a bandwidth of 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz is not necessarily a bad thing, but you don't need it, so you don't have to pay an absolute fortune for it. Now, size of the loudspeaker can also improve your reception quality. Little baby speakers, obviously they sound more tinny, and a bigger speaker gives a much deeper audio quality. So a slightly larger speaker might be better, certainly for a base station. And the material the speaker's made out of. For argument's sake, most speakers are made of a cardboardy, papery material that moves in and out in the cone. However, if you're going to use your radio in a hostile environment, then that's probably not a good idea. Most handy talkies, and certainly I've seen an upgrade kit from Sota Beams for an FT817, where you can fit a plastic speaker. And when I say plastic, the membrane, instead of being the paper cardboardy stuff, is a plastic, and therefore it's not susceptible for in moisture, picking up moisture. Because if you're out on a hilltop and you've got a paper cone, what will happen is eventually it'll pick up moisture and it'll go out of shape and it'll be distorted and horrible. So, the material the speaker's made of certainly becomes very useful. Now, the case or boxes you're going to put your speaker in, if you're going to build one from scratch, there's lots of designs on the internet of how to make a good loudspeaker. However, just bear in mind it'll be a cost. And you may find that if you've got a Duff speaker, the box could be very, very useful. So if somebody says to you, I've got this loudspeaker and enclosure, but the speaker's a bit rough, if you're only picking up for a pennies or so, the actual loudspeaker box may be very useful for you to fit another speaker into it and end up with a very cost-effective option. Now, don't forget, as I said earlier, we don't need hi-fi. So you can, and some radios actually have filters on them where you can cut the high frequencies off, and effectively it might just be a capacitor, and you switch a capacitor in parallel across the speaker to just drain off a lot of the high frequencies. It could be as simple as that, but just be aware that, just because the very expensive speakers have a filter on them, it might not be much of a filter. But there are other filters that you can get, third-party filters that you can fit into loudspeakers to adjust, along with some amplifiers. So, what could go wrong with buying a speaker? Well, loudspeakers, what could go wrong? Well, effectively, they're a coil of wire with on a tube, a coil of wire on a tube with a cone that slides up and down inside a magnet. Now, what I said before was you can get off-center cones. Basically, if you overdrive your speaker, so you put 3 watts through a half-watt speaker, the wire heats up and the cone goes off-center. It's no longer round, it becomes elliptical. Now, you can tell this because if you're very careful and you take a speaker with it facing towards you, the actual loudspeaker, if you just push lightly on the cone, if you hear it rubbing, that's a sure sign that the loudspeaker has got an off-center cone, and you need to replace it because it will give you distortion. You need to look for tears in the cone, because tears in the cone can cause a lot of problems, and if they're too bad, the speaker might be written off. However, you can repair them with glue and tissue paper and bits and pieces, and there are lots of videos on the internet showing you how to do it. You need to check the wiring. Make sure that the wiring, before you plug it in or do anything, is not faulty, damaged in any way, shape or form. And have a good look around the case as well. Make sure that the case is not damaged. And all these things are really the sort of things you should be looking at rallies to make sure that you're not buying a pup. Now, if you're also buying a rally, I would suggest there's a couple of things you could do. Before you buy, if you've got a multimeter, put the multimeter quickly across the loudspeaker, across the terminals or the plug. Now, don't hold it on for ages. You won't measure the impedance because it's a multimeter. A multimeter measure resistance. What you will hear is a pop or a thump. If you hear a pop or a thump from your speaker as you just tap the lead on, hold one on the earth and just tap the live on, that will pretty much tell you that the multimeter movement is working And it won't tell you whether you've got an off-center cone, but it'll tell you if it's working. And another way of doing it, if you've got that far, then it's probably worth trying to connect it to your handy talkie and see if it works with your handy talkie, because that's another good way of testing it. Now, moving on slightly, we talked about loudspeakers and buying them from rallies and one thing and another. What else can we do for loudspeakers from the shack to keep the cost down? Well, how many times have you been to a rally where there's computer speakers there? Okay, well, you pick up a set of computer speakers. One of them will be powered, and the other one will be just a generic loudspeaker in a box. Possibly very useful, and you pick them up for pennies, trust me. Now, if you're putting a amplified system in, then the computer speaker might be quite useful. If you only want to use one with the amplified system, then where you've taken off the second speaker, just put a resistor across the speaker terminals, or where the speaker would normally feed, and that way, if you ever want to go back to using it as a stereo speaker system, you haven't ruined the amplifier. So a set of computer speakers are quite a useful option. The other thing coming more and more available these days are Bluetooth speakers. Now, quite useful, but our radios don't have Bluetooth, or very few do. However, there are devices that you can plug into a 3.5mm jack to become a Bluetooth transmitter. So you can plug something into a Bluetooth transmitter into your external speaker socket and run a Bluetooth speaker. Now, that might be very, very useful in a shack where you got lots of wires, or you're trying to make things look really neat and you don't want to mess. Not the best way to do it, but an option. And the other thing is speaker mics. When we cover everything here, speaker mics, well, they're never very good quality. I've never found a brilliant one. They're okay. They do the job, but I wouldn't want to listen to them long time. So there you go. Now, in fairness, there's lots of information out on the internet you guys could pick up on. There's eham.net has a review of amateur radio and communications type speakers. And don't forget, there are lots of people around, and not just, I'm only mentioning one because it comes to mind at the moment, but people like BHI that do noise reduction speakers and have all the bits and pieces, an amplified speaker. But don't forget, a lot of these functions now are starting to make their way into radio. So do we need a noise reduction speaker? Depends on the radio you're using. You know, there's not a one fit all. So kind of, yeah, loudspeakers are very important to us. Depending where you're fitting your radio, yeah, to get best audio results, you probably need to get a speaker out in the clear so you can hear it. And if your radio's buried in a rack unit, you won't hear it particularly well. So, horses for courses. Just a few things I've run by for you about testing speakers and what can go wrong. But hopefully, this might have been of use to some of you.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
Well, hey everyone, it's just me there wrapping up the show this episode. Martin is away playing SSB Field Day in the UK this weekend, so I'm wrapping up the show here for him. As always, we'd like to thank our monthly and subscription donors and John Peterson for his one-off donation, and we'd ask you to consider us by visiting www.icqpodcast.com/donate. When you can send away is always greatly appreciated. We'd like to thank Chris Howard M0TCH, Dan, Kilo Bravo 6 November Uniform, Martin, Mike 0 Sierra Golf Lima, and Frank, Kilo 4 Foxtrot Mike Hotel for taking part in the News Roundtable. Of course, thanks to Martin M1MRB for the feature in this episode, and we just ask you to consider us at the usual locations. So all the links, information you need, etc., icqpodcast.com. If you haven't done already, sign up for the newsletter to keep in touch with what's going on with the show and the website over the days between publishing. And of course, you can not only just hear us, but you can see us as well by visiting youtube.com/ICQ podcast, where a collection of videos, etc., are there for you to enjoy. Well, don't worry about Mrs. B. You'll be happy to know I made her a cup of tea when I was in London last weekend, and even made sure there's some chocolate biscuits there for her too. So she'll be well looked after, even though Martin's out playing radio in a field today, and she'll be well looked after there. Well, guys, we'll catch up with Paul again in a fortnight's time. Look after yourself and continue to enjoy the hobby. 73 Zell.